They called him the Diesel, but John Riggins was more than a nickname, more than a bruising run, more than a highlight from a forgotten era. He was a force of nature dressed in shoulder pads, a running back who didn't dance, didn't dodge, didn't glide. He collided, he absorbed, he dragged entire defenses down the field. And for over a decade, he was one of the most unstoppable postseason players the NFL has ever seen. But today, you almost never hear his name. Somehow, one of the greatest playoff performers in league history, one of the toughest running backs ever, a Super Bowl MVP who produced iconic moments that defined an entire franchise, has quietly faded from modern conversation. His dominance has slipped through the cracks, buried beneath newer stars, highlight era offenses, and the way football remembers only what's recent. This is the story of the man they forgot, the legend who refused to go down, and the running back whose greatness deserves to be brought back into the light. This is the rise, reign, and quiet disappearance of John Riggins. Before John Riggins became one of the most feared runners in NFL history, he was just a kid growing up in the flat, wind-swept farmlands of Kansas. There were no silver spoons, no personal trainers, no national attention. What he did have was raw strength, a stubborn competitive fire, and a work ethic forged from long days spent outdoors. Football wasn't his destiny, it was an outlet. It was a place where all that restless energy could finally be unleashed. By the time he reached the University of Kansas, that energy had become something coaches couldn't ignore. Riggins didn't run like other backs of his era. Where most runners glided, he thundered. Where others avoided contact, he initiated it. His legs churned like machinery, and defenders who dared meet him head on often regretted the decision immediately. KU fans didn't just watch him, they braced for impact every time he touched the ball. He rewrote the school's record books, grinding his way to the top of the all time rushing list. But what made him special wasn't just the yards, it was the style of it. He ran angry but controlled, violent but calculated. Every carry looked like a challenge he refused to lose. And yet, despite everything he accomplished in college, Riggins didn't enter the NFL with the aura of a guaranteed superstar. The league praised his toughness, but questioned whether that style could survive at the professional level. When the New York Jets drafted him 6th overall in 1971, they believed they were getting a strong, reliable runner, but they had no idea they were holding a dormant Hall of Fame career in their hands. In New York, Riggins showed flashes of brilliance, but he was boxed in by a franchise still living off the fumes of its Joe Namath glory years. The offense lacked identity, the coaching lacked vision, and the Jets kept trying to fit Riggins into roles that never matched who he truly was. He wasn't a finesse runner, he wasn't a situational player, he was a workhorse, but he was never treated like one. Year after year, the same question followed. Was he good, or was he simply tough? And that lingering doubt, that failure to recognize what he really could be, would eventually push Riggins toward a decision that would change both his life and the future of an entire franchise. Because John Riggins was about to walk away from the New York Jets and walk straight into the chapter that would make him a legend. When John Riggins left the Jets and signed with Washington in 1976, it wasn't treated like a blockbuster move. It wasn't breaking news. It wasn't the kind of signing that shifts a franchise trajectory overnight. Most of the league saw it as a solid addition, a tough back, a proven grinder, someone who could help but not necessarily reshape a team's identity. Riggins arrived quietly, without the spotlight, without the expectations that usually follow future legends. But inside the building, coaches saw something different. They saw a runner built not for finesse, but for domination. They saw a body engineered for late game punishment, for cold weather football, for the kind of bruising style that decided championships long before the era of spread offenses and air it out attacks. Riggins possessed a power that couldn't be measured by early career stats, a presence that demanded a certain kind of football. Still, his early seasons in Washington were steady but unspectacular. He showed toughness, reliability, flashes of explosiveness, But the offense around him wasn't designed to unleash a workhorse. Washington was in transition, new personnel, new schemes, new expectations. And Riggins remained an underutilized asset and a system searching for identity. Then, in 1981, Joe Gibbs arrived. Gibbs didn't just see Riggins differently, he understood him. He recognized that Riggins wasn't a complementary piece. He was the potential centerpiece of a physical, punishing offense. Gibbs believed in winning by imposing will, by controlling the clock, by wearing teams down until their defensive line no longer wanted to tackle. And to execute that philosophy, he needed a symbol of that brutality. A runner who could turn 3 yards into six, 6 yards into 10, and 10 yards into a demoralizing march down the field. Riggins became that symbol. Under Gibbs, everything changed. The offense shifted around him. The blocking schemes catered to his strengths. Washington invested in a powerful offensive line, the group that would become known as the Hogs, and gave Riggins the runway he never had in New York. Suddenly, the same back who once felt boxed in was now the engine of an offense designed specifically for his style. He ran harder, he ran meaner, he ran with a clarity of purpose that reflected a new confidence. Teammates fed off his energy. Fans rallied behind his toughness. Riggins wasn't just playing football, he was personifying Washington's identity. When John Riggins walked away from football in 1980, it didn't feel like a superstar retiring. It felt like a rugged, overworked veteran stepping aside after too many collisions and too little appreciation. Washington moved on, the league moved on, and for a moment, it looked like Riggins' career might end quietly. A good back remembered fondly but never fully celebrated. Then, after a year away from the game, Riggins did something that stunned everyone. He returned. But this wasn't the same Riggins who left. This version was older, leaner, mentally sharper, and physically reborn. The time away hadn't softened him. It had recharged him. It gave him clarity. It gave him purpose. He came back not to rebuild his career, but to finish it on his own terms. Under Joe Gibbs, the offense was finally ready for him. The Hogs were in place, the system was fully installed. The team identity, tough, physical, relentless, was carved in stone. And when Riggins re entered that environment, everything snapped into perfect alignment. The transformation was immediate. Riggins became the heartbeat of the team. His carries went up, his yardage climbed, and the offense began to lean on him the way Gibbs had always intended. But the regular season was only the primer. Where Riggins made his true mark, where his legend was forged, was in the postseason. Then came the moment that changed everything. January 30th, 1983, Super Bowl 17. 4th and 1, Washington trailing season on the line. Most coaches punt, most players tighten up, but Riggins, he lived for moments where everything came down to one collision. The play was simple. I formation power left. Riggins took the handoff, hit the hole, shrugged off Miami corner Don McNeil like he was pushing aside a gust of wind, and thundered 43 yards down the sideline for a touchdown that defined the era. The run didn't just win a championship, it crystallized his legacy. It turned the Diesel into a symbol of unstoppable force. Riggins didn't just play well in that postseason, he authored one of the greatest playoff performances in NFL history, rushing for 610 yards in 4 games, a record that stood for decades. He was named Super Bowl MVP. He became the face of Washington's dominance. He also became a hero in the city. But more importantly, he cemented himself as a player whose greatness transcended statistics. He was a tone setter, a culture changer, a myth built from flesh and bone. Yet somehow, unbelievably, that myth would start to fade again in the decades to come. After the iconic run in Super Bowl 17, John Riggins entered a phase of his career that should have permanently secured his place in every conversation about the greatest running backs ever. What came next wasn't a fluke or one magical postseason. It was a stretch of dominance so overwhelming, so punishing, and so historically rare that it should stand beside the best stretches from any running back in NFL history. But somehow, it doesn't. From 1983 to 1985, Riggins became a touchdown machine. Washington's offense leaned on him like he was an entire strategy by himself. Defenses knew what was coming. They knew the Hogs were about to fire off the ball. They knew Riggins was getting the handoff. They knew contact was inevitable. And they still couldn't stop him. In 1983, at 34 years old, an age where most running backs are either retired or hanging on by a thread, Riggins put together one of the most astonishing seasons ever recorded. He scored 24 total touchdowns, breaking the NFL single-season rushing touchdown record at that time. He finished with over 1,300 rushing yards, carried Washington back to the postseason, and did it with a workload that would break most players in their prime. And then he did it again the next year and the next. What made this stretch extraordinary wasn't just the stats, it was how he did it. Riggins wasn't relying on speed. He wasn't breaking 80-yard runs. He was imposing his will, play after play, hit after hit, pile after pile. He was a sledgehammer disguised as a running back, and every fourth quarter became a test of who would break first, Riggins or an exhausted defense begging for the game to end. Yet, for all that greatness, modern fans rarely acknowledge this stretch. Riggins doesn't appear in barbershop debates. He isn't mentioned next to other great power backs. New generations know the names Peyton, Campbell, Dickerson, Bettis, all deserving, all iconic, but somehow, Riggins' dominance in the mid-80s sits quietly in the back of history, overlooked, despite being one of the most punishing extended peaks the league has ever seen. How did a back who broke records in his mid-30s, a back who carried an entire franchise, a back who dominated the biggest moments, become a historical afterthought? The answer begins with what came next, a final chapter defined by longevity, legacy, and a slow fade that allowed time to bury a giant. By the mid-1980s, John Riggins had reached a place few running backs ever touch, the rare combination of dominance, leadership, and longevity. But even legends are not immune to time. As he pushed deeper into his mid-30s, the physical toll of more than a decade of collisions began to show. The hits were heavier, the recovery was slower, and the body that once churned through defenders like a machine finally started to feel the weight of the years. But even in decline, Riggins was different. He didn't drift off quietly. He didn't pad stats in garbage time or hang around as a shadow of his former self. He remained productive, impactful, and respected. In 1984, at 35 years old, he rushed for over 1,200 yards and scored 14 touchdowns, numbers that defy every rule football fans think they know about the lifespan of a running back. The NFL was entering a new era. Flashy offenses, highlight-driven media, superstars built on speed and spectacle. Riggins' greatness didn't translate cleanly into that new world. His best plays weren't about finesse, they were about punishment. His legacy wasn't built on statistics alone, it was built on moments, on toughness, on postseason dominance. But moments fade if they aren't replayed. Toughness gets forgotten when the game's style evolves. And postseason legends become footnotes when the conversation shifts to numbers and headlines. So as the league changed, Riggins' name slowly slipped out of the mainstream. Younger fans grew up without seeing his impact. Broadcasters rarely mentioned him. Debates about the greatest runners ever leaned towards flashier resumes. And without a modern comparison, Riggins became harder to place for people who never saw him play. By every measurable standard, John Riggins should be one of the most universally celebrated running backs in NFL history. He delivered one of the greatest postseason runs ever recorded. He authored one of the most iconic plays in Super Bowl history. He broke touchdown records at an age when most backs are long gone. And he became the physical and emotional identity of a championship team. And yet, his name barely echoes in today's NFL conversations. So how does someone with that resume get pushed into the margins of history? First, Riggins played in an era that doesn't translate cleanly to the modern highlight reel culture. His style wasn't flashy. He wasn't hurdling defenders or racing past cornerbacks in open space. He wasn't a home run hitter. He was a relentless punisher. The kind of back whose greatness accumulates over 4 quarters, not 4 seconds. In a league now fueled by explosive plays and instant clips, a players whose brilliance lived in the grind simply gets overshadowed. Second, Washington's legacy became tangled over the decades. Name changes, organizational dysfunction, and national controversies blurred the franchise's historical identity. Younger fans have no emotional connection to those early 80s teams, even though they were among the most physical and dominant squads ever assembled. When a franchise's glory years fade from collective memory, its stars fade with them. Third, Riggins' numbers, while impressive, don't scream for attention the way modern metrics do. He wasn't chasing 2,000-yard seasons or highlight-friendly averages. His greatness was situational. Cold weather games, playoff runs, must-have drives. He was the ultimate when it mattered most player, but the league doesn't always honor the nuance when retelling its stories. And fourth, the NFL simply stopped replaying his moments. His Super Bowl run lives in a team history, but not in the NFL's broader cultural rotation. Younger generations never saw it live. Older fans remember it, but nostalgia alone doesn't keep a legend front and center in a league obsessed with what's new. But here's the truth that cuts through all the noise. John Riggins didn't fade because he failed to be great. He faded because the league failed to keep telling his story. A Hall of Famer, a champion, a playoff monster, a symbol of power football at its purest form, forgotten not by failure, but by time, trends, and a changing game that no longer resembles the one he dominated. And that brings us to the final chapter, the reminder this story exists to deliver. You can bury a name, you can overlook a player, but you cannot erase what John Riggins left on the field. He deserves his place among the greats, and it's time to put him back there. John Riggins wasn't just a running back, he was a force the NFL couldn't contain and a legend the modern game has somehow forgotten. His toughness, his postseason dominance, and the moments he delivered when everything was on the line deserve to be remembered every bit as loudly as today's stars. If you enjoyed this story and want more forgotten legends brought back into the spotlight, hit that like button, subscribe to Old School Sundays, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. The Diesel's legacy lives on, and we're here to make sure it's never buried again.